everything after this should be live.
Sounds good. Hello, I'm Rick Steele, and I serve as the chair of the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being held remotely by conference call and other electronic media. Richard Nobles, Jonna Norton, Abby Callis,
Here.
Jessica Hamilton, Tiffany Johnson,
Here.
Janine Kesterson,
Here.
Rodney McNeil,
Here.
and Zach Parrott.
Here.
All right. I note the following staff members are also present: David Fye
Here.
and Leslie Allen.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or COMA, does not require advisory committees to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals have requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public to attend the meeting free without cost through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of COMA are not suspended. Therefore, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the COMA. And Richard Nobles is entering on the waiting room, so he is also present as well.
Noted.
On May 22nd, 2023, we sent notice to the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of advisory committee meetings. The notice also was posted on the board's website at ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and the YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office by sending, or actually because we're after hours, the best way to contact the board office and concerned about any issues would be to send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And the conference call line is active. I checked before the meeting began, and there's no one currently on the conference call line.
Thank you, David. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on the agenda, which I believe is the agenda approval. You all should have received that, I believe, yesterday afternoon. So hopefully you had a chance to look at that. If there's a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Richard. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Tiffany. We have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the agenda, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. Our next item on the agenda is the review and approval of the minutes from our meeting on April 11th of this year. And I believe that was also sent yesterday afternoon. And hopefully you had a chance to look at that. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? I'm sorry, as to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve.
Was that Dr. Callis?
Yes, that was me. Sorry.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Rodney. All in favor of approving the minutes, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is the executive director's report. So David, I will let you take that away.
Okay, thank you, Rick. I will start with some operations updates. First, concerning a few IT items, we are working on implementing some of the new provisions for a bill that passed this legislative session, sub for Senate Bill 131. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but we are working on the process to, when we implement new changes, there's a lot of work behind the scenes. And one of those is to work with our licensing vendor and make sure that we have the appropriate forms taken care of and make sure that we're actually able to issue some of the new things that we're working on. And so we've been meeting, or we have a meeting set up with our licensing vendor to make sure our items will be running smoothly after the bill becomes effective. And also as part of that bill, in terms of operations, we received authority to hire 2 new licensing specialists. So we are working on logistics for those 2 hires. We cannot hire anyone until after the fiscal year begins based on the way that was approved. And so the state fiscal year does begin on July 1st, 2023, but we're working on trying to get a lot of those logistics in place. So that way we can start interviewing people and hire 2 new licensing specialists, hopefully sometime after the beginning of the fiscal year begins. Additionally, we have been doing a transition to new technology for all staff members. A couple of years ago, we started with the phase-in approach of moving staff members from their existing desktop computers to new laptops to the state's Desktop as a Service program. We went ahead and moved a few over last 2 years ago, and then a few more last year. And we're completing the transition this year by moving 5 additional members over. So we will be doing those on a rotating basis to make sure that all staff members have good technology. And then also we were recently able to purchase 2 new pieces of equipment to allow us to do some hybrid meetings. In our board conference room, we have a projector that had become quite dated and needed to be replaced. And also we needed a better camera to be able to do in-person or hybrid meetings. And so I applied for a couple of grants of federal dollars for modernization of equipment, and we were approved for grant funding for those 2 items that totaled about $2,100. So we did get those 2 items installed, and we are using them for meetings if we have an in-person meeting here. But very appreciative of that funding being made available. And I think if you had a chance to see some of our meetings that are in person or hybrid, you can kind of see how that new technology is working out. In terms of some legislative updates, I'll go ahead and start with the agency budget. So just kind of as a reminder, the state of Kansas does not provide the BSRB with operating funding. We mainly run off of licensed revenue that we collect. And the legislative role is to go ahead and set a limit each year and how much we can spend from our fee fund. And as part of that process, the House and Senate separately look at the agency's budget and have the opportunity to ask questions, look at performance measures, and then they have the ability to make adjustments to the agency's budget. And so this year we submitted a revised estimate for the current year, fiscal year 23, and then also a budget request for fiscal year 24 and 25. The governor made a recommendation for those years as well. And when the budget was heard before the Senate, they agreed with the governor's recommendations for expenditures in all 3 years with no changes. On the House side, they recommended the same amount of funding as the governor had recommended, but there was some proviso language that was included on the bill or on the budget. And part of this was during the House Budget Committee, they had some questions about a bill that the board had requested this session. And so one of the items in that bill request, which was being heard by a different committee, would have added a requirement of continuing education and cultural diversity. And so even though the budget committee process is separate from the bill process, they can ask any questions when I'm at the microphone, and they ask questions on the bill. And I discussed the continuing education proposed requirement and the BSRB bill. And so when they were making recommendations on the agency's budget, they added proviso language for fiscal year 24 and 25 that would have prevented the BSRB from requiring as a condition of licensure or license renewal, education or training in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, critical race theory, or other related topics. When that went to the House Appropriations Committee, they discussed if that should stay on the budget or not, and ultimately decided to keep that on the budget. And then when the budget was put together in a budget bill, it did pass the House with that version. And ultimately what happens is the House and the Senate pass separate budget bills. They come together to resolve items of difference. And when they did that, they discussed this topic, and ultimately it was the consensus opinion of the legislature to go ahead and leave that proviso on the agency's budget, and they went ahead and passed the budget with that proviso included. Now, as with any bill that passes the legislature, there's a period of time for which the governor can review those items. And specifically for appropriations bills, the governor has authority to do line item vetoes. So she can veto a particular section of a bill instead of vetoing the entire bill. And so for the budget bill, the governor vetoed the proviso language added by the legislature. When the legislature returned for the final wrap-up period, which is usually called omnibus, they have the opportunity to consider veto overrides. And so basically what happened was several of the line item vetoes the governor had, the House considered as a veto override attempt. And the BSRB proviso language was the first one that was up. And by one vote, it failed. And so the veto override attempt failed, which means the governor's line item veto stands, which means the proviso language is not included on the agency's budget for fiscal year 24 and 25. And I realize that there has been a lot of movement on this issue for a few different months now, and that process can be a little confusing. So I just kind of wanted to pause and see if you all had any questions on that item. And if not, I'll go on to the next item, but just wanted to.
I don't have questions. I have thoughts that I'll kind of keep to myself for now.
You know, and I'm going to tell you, Richard, if you get to know Rick as well as I have, he's got this look like he just swallowed something. And so I'm going to say that he has thoughts too, but he's not going to say them either.
I'm not. I'm really not. But yeah.
Because I got some thoughts too.
Yeah. I think a few of us have thoughts about all of what happened between October 2022 and right now. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well,
So, but just, whatever thoughts we may or may not have aside. So our CE bill, though, is, as I recall, that was removed in committee, right? So
yeah, I can clarify that. The next item I was going to talk about was the bill the BSRB requested, but
Sure.
but you're right. I mentioned that the board had requested new statutory language to add a continuing education requirement and cultural diversity. And when that bill was worked separately in committee, that item was removed from the bill. So that item had been removed from the BSRB bill, but at the same time, this discussion on the proviso language was taking place separately as part of the budget process. Ultimately, the items in the BSRB bill, some of those items did pass, but the item that would have added the cultural diversity, continuing education, that piece was removed. So we don't currently require any continuing education in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or critical race theory, or the other items that were mentioned in that proviso. But it could have had an impact potentially on any recommendations the board might have made in the next couple of years related to those matters. So just kind of wanted to clarify the different movements on that item. But Rick, you're right. In terms of the BSRB bill, that specific item that started the conversation was removed as part of that bill working process. But
So
I'll go
just-
ahead. Okay.
yeah, just a comment. So that will be, the door is open then to reintroduce that idea. And there may be some creative ways to think about framing that recommendation in next legislative session that can be that can overcome some of the resistance that there has been to it. I'll put it that way. And that seems like a diplomatic approach.
Potentially, yes. I mean, new bills can come up every year, but it definitely did get a lot of attention this year for sure. In terms of the BSRB bill, that was originally requested as a House bill. By the end of the session, it had passed the House in a form. There were a few items that were removed, a few items that were added. I think the last time your advisory committee met, that might have been around the time that the Senate was considering working the bill, or maybe it was right around that time period, but maybe it's right after. But ultimately, the bill went to the Senate. I tried to meet with the Senate members. I did actually meet with each of the Senate members of the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee, each individually, and explained the concerns the board had with the new items that were added to the bill, some of the logistical challenges, and I requested some amendments, but ultimately the Senate committee did not make amendments to change the bill to address the concerns the board had raised with the House adjustments to the bill. But they did make a minor change to the bill, which meant that there was an item of difference, which means that the bill could go to conference committee at the end of the session. And so what happened is when the legislature returned, or I think right before they left for their omnibus period, the bill that was the BSRB bill was combined with two other bills in substitute for Senate Bill 131. And while there are two other bills, I think each of them is about a page or two, but the vast majority of that final bill, about 65 to 70 pages, are all items related to the BSRB. And so I'll do a little quick summary in terms of some of the items that are in the bill, because ultimately the bill did get passed by the legislature. It went before the governor, and the governor did sign it into law. There are a lot of good items in the bill. There are also some really challenging items that we're working through right now, but it will be going into law. The effective date of the bill is July 1st, 2023, so nothing becomes effective in the bill until beginning that date. But we are trying to make preparations for a smooth transition to the new items in that bill. So just as a quick summary of some of the items that are in that bill, related to the BSRB, there was language the board had recommended that would reduce the amount of time individuals had to work in other jurisdictions for reciprocity. There is a statute for most of the professions, and for most of the professions to qualify for reciprocity, applicants would have either needed to come from a jurisdiction with substantially equivalent license requirements, or in the past, they would have needed to work for about 48 of the last 54 months, about 4 years in that jurisdiction and meet other requirements to come in for reciprocity. And the board recommended reducing that amount from 48 months down to 12 months. And that period of time is more in line with the period of time that was created a couple of years ago by a different reciprocity bill that was targeted at military members, military spouses, but also applied to individuals who reside in Kansas and those that intend to reside in Kansas. So this change basically falls more in line with some of the time frame from that military bill. There was also an item that would create new types of temporary licenses for graduates of social work programs that are in candidacy, which means that they are seeking accreditation and they are hitting their targets towards a path to accreditation, but that process can take 3 to 3.5 years. So what happens sometimes is individuals graduate from a program in candidacy for accreditation, and because their program is not accredited, we have to apply some alternate requirements. And for some of these new online programs, they may not be able to meet those requirements. So there is a model used in Minnesota that we included language based on, which allows the board to issue a temporary license for bachelor's and master's graduates to have the temporary license while their program is in candidacy. And then once it becomes like an accredited program, they can get a permanent license, so long as they meet the other requirements. There's also a new type of student addiction counselor license. It's a temporary license for individuals who are trying to become addiction counselors. They already have a fair amount of the coursework accomplished already, and they would need to work out an agreement with their school and also with a prospective employer to be able to work under this new student temporary license for a limited period of time while they're finishing up the coursework and working at the same time. But it's been positively received, and we're optimistic about that new type of student temporary license for the addiction counseling profession. Additionally, most of the professions for the board have a temporary license that lasts 1 year. Some of the temporary licenses last 2 years, but most of them have lasted 1 year. And we have heard that some professions have had applicants that have difficulty passing a licensing examination. And so as a way to address that and have more consistency, the board recommended changing the amount of time for temporary licenses from 1 year to 2 year to make them all in line with that 2 year, which would give people more time to pass the test if they are struggling to pass the test. And it would also provide some more security to employers if they employ someone with a temporary license. They know that, hopefully they won't need it for the 2 years. Hopefully someone will pass the examination and then they'll be able to get a permanent license. But in case they experience difficulty, this provides a little bit more security in that regard. Additionally, the board added some language to try to address workforce in other ways. One is the licensed psychology profession previously had language and regulation which allowed individuals who were coming upon the end of their license period, who were needing more time to complete their CE hours. They had a way to request additional time to complete those hours, which would allow them to still renew their license and stay licensed. The other professions didn't have that language in the regulation. So the board recommended adding language to statute to allow that flexibility to other professions with some adjustments. Basically, they could get up to 3 months of additional time to complete those hours, but they had to show an extreme situation, such as an extenuating circumstance for needing the additional time. And it is not an extension of their license. It will just allow them to renew their license and stay licensed, but they will get a few more months to complete that. And the version in the bill also says that you can't do this for more than one license period back to back. So this is not something we want someone to rely upon every time, but if there was an unusual situation that kept them, we don't want someone to let their license expire based on an extreme situation that was beyond their control. Additionally, in terms of having individuals come back to the workforce, there have been individuals whose licenses have expired over the years, and we have heard that some of those individuals may want to come back, but currently for those individuals to reinstate their license, they have to pay double the license fee, and they need to have all the continuing education hours for the past license period. And so the board recommended 2 items to address this. One, if individuals have had a license that's been expired for a year, that they have stepped away, but it has been a while since they had a permanent license, they would be able to come back for half the cost. So instead of paying the renewal fee and the reinstatement fee, they could come back for just the renewal fee. And then also for individuals who had not completed all of those continuing education hours, they could apply for a newly created 6-month reinstatement temporary license. And what that would allow them to do is to work for up to 6 months while finishing those CE hours. And then once they had finished those hours and could demonstrate that to the board, they could have their permanent license fully reinstated. So trying to address workforce by individuals who had previously been licensed, who had already met the requirements once, but may want to rejoin the workforce after perhaps having a time period away from their profession. Additionally, there were some changes to different requirements for some of the professions. For licensed psychology, we had talked about changing the standard of licensure from having good moral character to meriting the public trust, which is more in line with the other professions and also more consistent with other states. For the behavior analyst profession, there is some language to add disciplinary remedies that were more in sync with some of the other professions. The statutes that were originally added allowed us to suspend or revoke a license, but for minor violations, it didn't provide us that language and that flexibility to have appropriate disciplinary remedies. So now the new language has been adjusted to make it more in sync. And additionally, there was not language that provided the board the flexibility to reinstate a behavior analyst license. So the authority to do that has been added, and that profession will need to develop some regulations. There were also a number of statutory cleanup items that were added, and then there was concerning continuing education. I talked a little bit about the board had originally recommended a new requirement of 3 hours in continuing education and cultural diversity. As part of that, the board had put forward a 2-part proposal. One was to add the new requirement, but they didn't want to have too many hours restricted to certain categories. So for some individuals right now that are able to diagnose and treat, those individuals have to have 6 hours in diagnosis and treatment every 2-year license period. So as part of the new requirement the board had proposed for cultural diversity continuing education, they would decrease the number of hours in diagnosis and treatment from 6 to 3. Well, the legislature removed the language about adding the new hours of cultural diversity training, but they went ahead and decided that they wanted to lower the hours in diagnosis and treatment from 6 to 3. So that will begin starting July 1st of 2025 for individuals that are currently able to diagnose and treat based on their licensure. And then the other 3 remaining items that were included in the final version of the bill, there was some language that reduces some of the requirements for individuals seeking clinical licensure as a social worker. There was 15 specific course hours that were defined as someone would needed to take those hours, and those were reduced from 15 down to 3. And also there was language that was changed concerning the practicum and also the postgraduate work experience. Previously, the language for the 3,000 hours of postgraduate experience indicated that 1,500 hours of direct client contact had to be providing diagnosis and treatment. And the new requirement says 1,500 hours, including but not limited to, and then it has that with some other examples. But in terms of, verifying what is required for that, it really seems to open that up beyond what it was initially written for. But that was something the legislature changed, and we raised the concerns specifically from the Social Work Advisory Committee and from the Social Work Board members, but the legislature kept that item in the bill. Additionally, there were some operating changes that the legislature added for the BSRB. One would be to send a 15-day message to any applicant for licensure or registration or permit, letting them know if they have a complete application, and if it's not complete, what else is missing for it to be complete. And then a new requirement that would make us issue a decision within 30 days of having a complete application. And then it also includes language for the board to develop in rules and regulation an expedited license review process. And so the board will need to be working on regulations to accomplish that new task. And last, there was the creation of a community-based license, and that was discussed at the last advisory committee meeting. We had raised concerns about the language concerning that new community-based license. Unfortunately, the amendments that we had proposed to address those issues were not adopted. And when the legislature came together at the end, they expanded it a little bit further than what was previously proposed. The initial proposal would that it would be for individuals within the scope of employment at community mental health centers. That was expanded to also include individuals under the scope of employment of FQHCs and also psychiatric residential treatment facilities, and then some other drug and alcohol facilities that are identified in statute. And then it was also expanded to include the master's level psychology profession. Initially, it was for licensed psychology, the non-clinical level of professional counseling, non-clinical level of marriage and family therapy, and the non-clinical level of social work licensees. And so I understand that the board had very strong concerns about this item, and the advisory committee also, many of the advisory committees had very strong concerns. Unfortunately, even though those concerns were raised in the meeting and they were raised outside the meeting, this was something the legislature went ahead and kept in the bill, and now it will be implemented. So I'll go ahead and pause here and see if you have any questions on items specifically in the BSRB bill. As I mentioned, behind the scenes, our staff is working on a plan for implementing as many of these as we can as possible, as quickly as possible. But there's a number of moving pieces. As you can tell, I had a pretty lengthy summary of all those items, but the bill itself, as a starting point, was a very aggressive and ambitious bill. And I applaud the board for that. And I also applaud all of you as advisory committee members, because a lot of your discussions and recommendations went to the board, and the board really did a number of work in terms of putting this bill together. And so there's a lot of really good items in the bill. There's items of concern, but now that it's going to be in law as of July 1st, we're doing our best to make sure these things can be administered as quickly as possible. So I'll pause and see if you have any questions on that item.
I have two questions. One, when they specified FQHC, CMHC, and PRTF, did they specify a CCBHC? Because every CMHC in the state has to become a CCBHC. So I don't know, are we going to still have the designation of CMHC?
I don't believe they had a specific reference to CCBHCs.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I don't honestly know whether becoming a CCBHC means that that entity is not a CMHC. But if I remember correctly, I don't think the language included that reference.
Okay. My second question was, when you said reducing diagnostic and treatment hours from 6 to 3, I know you said July of 2025. That's every license that diagnoses and treats, right? Not just, that wasn't connected specifically to social work.
No, that would be for all professions that have levels of license that someone is able to diagnose and treat.
Got it.
Yeah, there's a number of these items that apply to almost all the professions. Behavior analysts are just unique in certain ways, but for the vast majority of the professions, there's a lot of similarities on some level. And so there are some distinctions, but on that item, it would be for any of the professions that are able to diagnose and treat.
Any other questions? Oh, Richard, go ahead.
So my understanding, and this is kind of the epilogue to this with regards to the expansion of the licenses. My understanding is that this was done by the legislature in an effort to address issues with the workforce. And this was kind of spoken to in press releases. Is there from the board standpoint, is there room for recourse next session in terms of advisories, or, well, it would actually need to be in statute? Like, is there ways in which we could submit language to be put into legislation to address some of these matters that we have found to be particularly difficult or egregious, even when it comes to some of the concerns that we have vocalized over the last several months?
The short answer is yes. And what I can tell you, so I'll try to be genuine in my response here. I really thought the original items in the bill were very positive and would help out with a lot of workforce issues. The concerns that were raised specifically about the community-based licenses, I had conversations with House committee leadership. I had conversations with every single member of the Senate Public Health and Welfare Committee. I believe what was likely happening at the same time was that advocates who wanted those changes were probably going around to the same people saying, no, we really want these things. These help us with an advantage, or these would really help us to benefit us in certain ways. And so I think, unfortunately, from our perspective in terms of wanting to protect the public and seeing that as a danger in terms of, would that aspect of these licenses be misleading? I think, unfortunately, while those points were raised, the individuals on the other side who said this would be helpful, their voices carried. In terms of, can we do something about it? That you can always request another bill. People had told me before, you have to be careful opening up statutes because you never know what's going to be put in there. And I originally had believed that that might be antiquated or outdated, because I believed that there was a way to have good partnership and come together and do things, responsibly. After this past session, I feel a little more jaded about that. But I do think, I don't think the solution is to sit on our hands and never bring forward legislation. I think we still have a responsibility to protect the public and offer good things up. I do think, though, that if we do that, it may be really, really important for us to rally the troops and get a lot of people coming to committees to offer testimony, or reaching out to members of the legislature, if possible, very visibly, to make sure that your voices are heard, and to make sure that I know that the thoughts and comments were heard, but I think we will probably, if we want to bring something forward, we'll have to have a lot of people verbally and visibly backing a lot of those things to have a positive change. That's my thought, having seen this session and how things happened.
The other thing we could think about is there will be some number of complaints that come to the CRC, right? I mean, that is always true.
Mhm.
If the number of complaints there would be good data. I don't like having to wait until people are harmed or perceive that they've been harmed. But if that happens, then that will provide some data that will inform future legislation, right? That you could point to.
Yeah, I think that could be the case. It's going to be, we have 15,000 permanent licensees across all the professions under the BSRB. So being able to track that, to really demonstrate that there is a risk or a harm, it may be a little challenging. And we work in these topics every day. So I don't mean to be too critical of the legislature, because I know they have to move on from different topics and they have to be authorities in all realms. But I'm just not sure what the right response is based on what happened this session. Because I really did feel like, based on comments that were made in committees last fall, that they were looking for us to bring forward something and work together. And my feeling on this is a little different, having gone through things this session, unfortunately. So
I'm also a little bit curious about what, oh, sorry, she doesn't like people walking outside. About Daisy, I apologize, about real world impact of these sort of things, because as somebody who's at a CMHC, I sort of wonder what we don't have. That's not a license that we have a position for. When I think about things about when you were talking about schools that not the accreditation, but being online, like we don't accept any students practicum at any level from a fully online program. So I'm sort of curious, like when it's real world, like does that have any meaning for what access to clients they'll have that they don't already have, if that makes sense? And I don't know the answer to that, but
yeah. Well, and in terms of one of the concerns, I think too, I had heard from some advocates of the new community-based licenses that this was intended to, at least in part, help with reimbursements for certain services. And ultimately, the BSRB does not really deal with reimbursements. I did reach out when it looked like the bill may pass. I reached out to representatives from the Department for Age and Disability Services and Department of Health and Environment to make sure that they were aware, just to make sure that they understood it too. Because some of these items, if you're not really an expert in a specific area, it may be hard to understand some of these distinctions. But also, I wanted them to be aware so that they could have things prepared, and hopefully for the reimbursements that they would be ready soon after us being able to issue these licenses. But I think a lot of the issues related to the reimbursements and perhaps the concerns about using different titles and initials, now that it's going to be put into law, it will be something that is in the statute. But I think in terms of some of the questions, we'll probably have to defer those to the entities that do the reimbursements concerning how that would work out. So. But if there's no other questions on the bill, I'll probably go to the next item. I did go ahead.
Sounds good.
Talked a lot about the items in the BSRB bill, but it is a significant bill and there's a lot of items in there. I did want to make you aware of a couple other bills, because we are still moving on multi-state compacts involving mental health. There was a bill that passed this session for professional counseling. It was House Bill 2288 that added Kansas to a multi-state compact for professional counseling. And that did pass and was signed into law. The infrastructure of that compact is not yet effective. So they're still working out how the logistics are going to work, but they're hopeful by the end of this year or maybe beginning of next year that they will be able to have that compact operational. For Kansas, we officially become a member of it July 1st. And the last board meeting, the board went ahead and appointed board member Laura Shaughnessy, who's the board member for professional counseling, to be the compact commissioner for the state of Kansas. And so I'll be working with her. She'll be attending those commission meetings. And then after July 1st, she'll be able to vote at some of those meetings. And then Senate Bill 66, that was a bill that basically creates a unified license verification portal for the state of Kansas for a lot of the professional licenses. And so it's intended to be sort of a one-stop shop. And it was discussed as a way to help out with military members and military spouses in terms of license verification and being able to do that more efficiently and more quickly. But essentially, the BSRB already has a verification portal on our website. So we'll be linking that with this new system they're putting together. And if there's further changes, I'll make you aware of those, but that is something behind the scenes we're working on as well. And then in terms of a few other updates, the last board meeting was May 8th, 2023. I do want to say congratulations to the advisory committee members that were reappointed to serve another 2-year term. Just as a reminder, advisory committee members serve 2-year terms and they can serve up to 4 2-year terms. And most of them are staggered. So there are individuals who come up 1 year and then the others will come up the other year unless they run out of terms. This year, the following advisory committee members were reappointed to another term. That was Abby Callis, Jessica Hamilton, Tiffany Johnson, and Doug Wright. And I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you. And we really appreciate all of your work on the advisory committee. Really look forward to working with you all or continuing to work with you all the next couple of years. Also, in terms of updates from that board meeting, the board received proposed unprofessional conduct regulations from each of the professions. You may recall that last year there was a process by which the advisory committees went through item by item and discussed any potential recommended changes. Those items were all combined, and in your packet, you received the same information that the board received concerning all those proposed changes for the different professions. And so at the board meeting, it was discussed that those would be sent back to the advisory committees so you could see for context what other committees had recommended, and then consider if you want to make any of those same changes to your regulations. The ultimate goal is to have those recommendations forwarded back to the board so the board can finish recommendations at the end of this calendar year. And then the board also noted it intends to hold its annual offsite planning meeting this year in person like it did last year. And that has been set for Monday, October 23rd. It will most likely be in Wichita, but I am currently working with some of those vendors to find a location for that all-day meeting for the board. And then just one other update. Board members on the board serve 4-year terms, and they are able to be reappointed for an additional 4-year term to serve up to 8 years total. We have 3 board members that we are expecting will end their time on the board at the end of June. That includes board member Deb Stidham, who is the board member for addiction counseling, also Rick Steele and Jonna Norton. And so wanted to recognize those 3 board members. And Rick, appreciate all of the work that you have done as a board member and as an advisory committee chair. But also want to make you all aware of those other 2 board members that their terms will be ended at the end of June. The statutes do say if a board member the governor has not replaced a board member or appointed a new person, that those board members are asked to continue to serve until a new person is appointed. But the last few years, the governor's office has been pretty timely, though it may be closer to July 1st before I know who the new board members will be appointed. So with that, I'll go ahead and end my report and I can answer any additional questions.
Any questions? Okay. I think the next item is old business, which starts with an update on the SIPAC Commission.
So my report on SIPAC for this meeting is going to be pretty short, but I thought I'd give you an up-to-date account of the number of APITs that we have. That's the ability to practice telehealth through SIPAC. And there are currently 84 licensed psychologists with a home state license in Kansas that have an APIT license through the commission. And then also the TAP, that's the Temporary Authority to Practice In-Person Services. So there are currently 7 psychologists in Kansas who have the ability to practice a limited number of in-state services in other compact states. There is an annual mid-year meeting that is coming up here in basically, I think, just a couple weeks. Actually, it's next week on June 13th. It's going to be most of that day. So I'll get some updates from that mid-year meeting, and then I'll bring them back to you and provide an update at the next advisory committee meeting in August.
Okay.
And
that was a brief.
That is my brief
update.
report today. Yeah.
That was very brief. You surprised me. Okay, so the next item in old business is you'll recall last time we started talking about two more regulations that we need to look at to determine whether they need to be updated. One of them has to do with continuing education, and those some information was in your packet. Specifically, our regulations in licensed psychology identifies ways that we can get continuing education, and it specifies the number of hours of continuing education that we need. What it does not do for us is provide regulations on the documentation of continuing education. And I guess many or most or maybe all of the other professions have regulations that identify how our continuing education should be documented. So in your packet, I believe you have a copy of our regulation 102-1-15, which is our continuing education regulation. And then you have several documents from other professions, including applied behavior analysis, addiction counseling, master's level psychology, and a couple of others. I'm not really recalling all of them. I just printed out three that identify what kind of documentation is necessary for the office to approve the information that we submit. Does that all make sense? Is that fairly clear? Okay. Hopefully you had a chance to look at those documents. I went through the documentation regulations of the other professions. One of the things you'll notice is that well, if you had gone to look at the other continuing education requirements for the other profession, you would notice a correspondence between each of the allowable continuing education activities and the documentation thereof, right? So when we think about this for psychologists, we might think about going through 102-1-15, sections D1 through D12, and thinking, okay, well, if attendance at a workshop is an allowable continuing education activity, what would that documentation be? Does that make sense as a process? If you just as a starting place, if you were to look at, and the reason I chose applied behavior analysis and master's level psychology is those are a little bit newer, and so they may reflect more similar to what we have. Our number one, which is attendance at a workshop, more or less corresponds to the C item from the applied behavior analyst, right? So if I were doing this and wanting to do the kind of the cheater's way of putting this together, I would say our number one, attendance at workshop, and I would just lift item C for that one from the applied behavior analyst, right? And that would also correspond generally to, yeah, C for the master's level psychologist as well, right? If that makes sense. Go ahead, Richard.
I think I'm missing that attachment for the other professions.
Yeah, I think I may have just sent you the items for the other professions, Rick, but
oh, okay. Well, that would be very bewildering. Okay, so I have in my possession regulation. If you wanted to look it up online, if you've got two screens, or if you can do this, for applied behavior analysts, it would be KAR 102-8-10. And if you wanted to look at the master's level psychologist, it would be 102-4-11A. And there are others that, I mean, I can, addiction counselors is 102-7-10. For my purposes, I really just kind of went with the applied behavior analysis for the most part. The general sense, just to put this in context, the general sense is it's a little weird that we don't have this. And I don't know that Leslie could tell us. It's a little bit weird that we don't have this. I don't know that it's caused a specific problem for the office, but it seems like it could.
It has caused confusion in the past where we can't really back up what we want. So, but I can't tell you why you don't have one. It's just always been that way.
Isn't that interesting, right?
Yeah.
So just to work this through, I could go to a workshop, and I could, if I were to be audited, and I were to say, yeah, I went to that workshop, it doesn't sound like there's a specification of what I would need to provide Leslie to document that I went to that. So theoretically, I could go to that and turn in a receipt for my registration fee and try to make that work as documentation that I went to a workshop, which, because we don't have a regulation, that would cause that office some trouble. That's probably not a really good documentation of attendance at a workshop, but we don't have anything that says what is. And so it would be helpful to the office, I think, if we recommended recommended a regulation to kind of button this down a little bit for them.
Yeah, Rick, I think right now what we would use is just the last items from 102-1-15, because in that regulation under item E, it talks about the responsibility of the psychologist to maintain personal continuing education records. But to your point, in terms of what would constitute that, F basically says in determining whether or not a claimed continuing education activity will be allowed, licensed psychologist may be required by the board to demonstrate that the content was clearly related to psychology or to verify psychologist participation in any claimed or reported activity. So it comes down to more of a weighing type issue versus the specifics that you're talking about that would be more helpful in terms of identifying those for us to be able to say, no, it should be this, and for people to have more of an understanding of that as well.
So if you have been able to pull up, just to simplify things, if we could all pull up or look at 102-8-10, that might be the easiest thing. And if you also have the 102-1-15, our number 1 looks to me like it corresponds to C, a signed statement from the provider of the seminar, institute, conference, workshop, or course indicating that the licensee attended the program. As a provider, I'm used to handing these out, right? And so as an attendee, I know you're used to getting them. That seems like a one-to-one correspondence. We could go through all of these. It seems like most of them are, in my mind, pretty self-evident. Number 2 on ours, first time preparation of a course, workshop, or other whatever. That looks a lot like number E. Oh, I'm sorry. My dog is about to go nuts. There's a squirrel outside. Dude, get it. Go. Okay, sorry about that. He really doesn't like squirrels. Actually, it's not E. Oh, it is.
G.
Yeah, actually,
G.
is it G? Yes, it is G. I can't read my own writing.
G is a syllabus, whereas 2, I guess it would be courses, but if it's a workshop,
Yeah,
that could be
H.
with H. It could be H.
It's kind of a combination. So I'm trying to
Yeah,
say,
I can see that. Yeah, I can see a combination of the two, Abby.
Yeah, because we've just combined them. It's like what you said, Rick, if you do if you're teaching a course, you're gonna have a syllabus. But like what you said, Richard, if you're doing a workshop, what you'll have instead is a brochure announcing your.
Or if you've done a presentation as a guest presenter somewhere, and it's not like a national or regional sort of deal, say it's local, I suppose you would have to get something from the organization indicating that, yes, this person presented on this date, or the invite to present from the organization.
Or even just the announcement, right? So
Okay, so the announcement would be
potentially, right? So I did something for the school nurses in Olathe the other day, a treatment and management of anxiety in the school system, right?
That's a great example.
And so I would like to claim that, right? And there is an announcement that says Rick Steele is going to be presenting this thing on this topic. That seems reasonable to me.
Yeah.
Unless
that's reasonable.
Leslie, if you'd rather, I can send you my slides from the talk. I mean, that would work too.
That'd be fun.
Okay, so would an announcement, what do you think, Leslie or David, would an announcement indicating the information be sufficient, or do you need? Because in that example, right? So I gave a, I don't know, 2.5 hour talk on that thing. I've got, I don't know, 65 slides. I don't know that you want me to submit my outline.
No, we usually ask them, it's just kind of I think that the announcement would be okay. We kind of, trust them that they'll give us the amount of time they spent preparation and presentation. So I think the announcement would be good.
Okay. So for 2, we have a kind of a mashup of G and H, I guess, if you just want, just so I guess if just G and H are included in the list of things that are acceptable, they cover both. Okay. 3 looks like it corresponds generally to I don't know if it looked like D to me.
What is 3? I can't pull
3
up.
is documented completion of a self-study program.
So that corresponds to E directly. E says a copy of a self-directed project.
Yeah, okay. That I have a question mark there because the word project kind of confused me a little bit. So when I was reading self-study program on our document, and then I read self-study project, that threw me just a little bit. But you think that works, Richard?
Yep.
So it seems like that's the correlation, but I would be interested in hearing other folks' thoughts and what Leslie has to say about that.
Oh,
I would like to hear Leslie, but I lean towards, oh wait, we went full screen. I lean towards D only because when I think self-study program, I think I've watched, and this is the new world of COVID, I think I've watched a DVD and I've done a self-study and then I've taken a test and I get a certificate, but it was self-study versus a self-directed project. I don't know that we want to give 40 continuing education hours for a self-directed project when there's no description of that. And for us, number 4, we allow up to 40 continuing education hours for a self-study program. So I feel like we'd want to keep it at D solely because there would be some sort of external source who is training you, you're self-studying, you're testing.
So
well,
documentation would need to be, and this is a great point, Abby. So the documentation, you just couldn't, because I think in Missouri, you can read a book and say, I read this book, and they give you the CEUs. They'll give you 10 CEUs for that.
Mhm.
It's in
Well,
Kansas.
Yeah, I don't think
Go
we
ahead,
allow
Rick.
for that.
And you don't have to prove it?
No, we
Missouri,
do allow for that.
We
Yeah.
do?
I
Uh-huh.
think that's number 3, because
Uh,
look at number 4.
Oh, yeah.
Right, number 3
So,
has nothing
okay.
about a post-test or certification from the provider.
Okay,
Number
so
4 says you've got a certification document of some kind.
okay, so 3 is E and 4 is D.
Okay,
So here's something though that I can't see the whole reg. I'm sorry. I don't have 2 screens at home. So there are in other professions regulations, a self study program or a self-study project that they design and send to the board for pre-approval. However, it's not, I think I've only reviewed 2 in the time that I've been with the board, and I've been with the board for 24 years.
Hmm.
And so the other professions were also looking at removing the self-directed project because there's no clear standards for what needs to be included.
And in this regulation, there's nothing about pre-approval. It only says the documented completion of a self-study program, which is, you can say, well, I did this post hoc, I read a couple of books, and
Right.
going by the main.
And in the regulation for behavior analysts, that would be
right.
copy of an article or book chapter.
Well, that's
Okay, so-
written by the provider in question,
Oh,
right?
that's written. Okay.
Yeah, so when I write a chapter, I get to claim some credits for that, but not if I read a chapter, right? So
Right.
the problem with our regulation, our CE regulation, is number 3, this documented completion of a self-study program. That means, which is, I think what Richard just said a little while ago, I read a book. It took me 10 hours to read the book, and I'm going to claim it.
Mm-hmm.
Alternatively, this just clicked for me. We offer a weekly didactic at my agency. Not every didactic comes with a post-test, and we do a certain number of them with post-tests because social workers can only do 10 hours. Social work licenses can have 10 hours without a post-test, and then the rest must be with post-test. So that's what this feels like, a similar regulation to what social workers have. So like these didactics at my agency, you could come and do a didactic on bullying, treating the victims of bullying, but if there were no post-test, it would fit in 3. And if it was one of the ones where I have designed a post-test, it would fit into 4. Both would go give you a certificate though.
Right.
That's the thing, is number 3 just doesn't mention that there's a certificate involved. So,
Right.
So I'm wondering about, so that seems like your examples. I mean, both of the examples are good ones, and this is limited to 12 hours, right? So that's important to recognize that we're not letting someone buy the whole farm for this.
Would it be okay to replicate B with number 3, where a statement signed by the instructor indicating the number of actual contact hours attended? That's an audited academic course, though.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
not
I guess that'd be C.
Okay. Can I just, if we're looking at it, you could make your 3 more clear.
Yeah.
Like in social work, it says if a post-test is not provided, an activity consisting of completing a computerized interactive learning module, viewing a telecast or videotape, listening to an audio tape, or reading, the maximum number is 10.
Right. And so that just doesn't require documentation,
Right.
right?
So if they would get a certificate for certain things, but not everything. And we would just, I mean, like when they say they read, we just have to kind of,
Well,
trust that they
the
did
other-
that.
I mean, that's an option. And then the other option is to add something to this new regulation that says if it's a self-study program or self-study activity for which there is no formal documentation, the licensee must provide a
Description or.
250 word or less description.
Yes,
of what was
I
learned.
like that.
You know, I mean, just
So in Missouri, I think, and I would have to check this. I think you've got to, and don't quote me on this. I think you might need to either provide the name of the book or books
Mm-hmm.
that you read in order to get
Yeah.
the credit.
I think it's reasonable to ask for that material. And I think it's also, I mean, maybe this is me being harsh, or I don't know what it's me being. Rodney, you can supply an adjective.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, thank you.
so the word is you're looking for is probably controlling. But go ahead.
Okay, sure. But I think it's reasonable to ask the licensee to provide a summary of the thing that they used if there's no opportunity for documentation.
Title and summary,
Huh?
the title and the summary of what.
Title and summary, yeah.
Mhm.
I think that's,
It's fair.
you think that's fair? You don't think that's me being overly?
No. I have a problem with just someone saying I read a book.
Yeah,
Mhm.
And there's no, like, how do you prove that?
right.
Well, and if we wanted to match social workers, we could limit it to 10 instead of 12, since
Sure.
they're limited at 10.
Social workers is lower, I think, because they only have to do 40 hours and you have to do 50.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that. Correct.
Leslie, how, just in terms of base rates, how frequently do people use that one? They tell you, I read a book, and you have to, at this point, accept it.
Well, we do ask for like the title. They
Mhm.
write that on their CEU form that they
Yeah.
read this book and they count how many hours. We haven't asked for a summary, but it happens actually, I think, quite a bit. It's
Okay.
kind of a filler when people figure out they didn't do enough continuing education.
Ah, okay. Because I have never tried to float that one past the board. I didn't even know I could.
Yeah, this whole conversation is just opening up all kinds of vistas for me.
Oh, okay. I read a book. It was a great one too. Woo.
So I have a question just for clarification. So if someone does a book, let's say we keep the 12 hours, what if it's an article or like, I guess my question would be, how do you determine those hours? Like
Mhm.
realistically, I
And
don't know, just
Tiffany,
be
you're
be
thinking,
reasonable.
sure. And Tiffany, you're specifically asking about if they read a book or read an article, not if they wrote a book or wrote an article, right?
Right.
Right, okay.
No, that's a really good question, Tiffany, because it's like, if you said, hey, I read this journal article and
Mhm.
claim 8 hours,
Man,
the journal article, I mean, I suppose certain journal articles could take 8 hours to read. If you haven't read a journal article in a while and it's a pretty dense journal article, maybe it does take 8 hours to read, but
Or you had a stroke.
I was trying to give the benefit of the doubt, and you erased all of that. Nope,
No.
there's no.
8 hours.
Okay.
To Dr. McNeil's point, no, that happened really. No, Rodney, like I mean, like an 8 hour read of a journal article, like No, that's not, that is,
It seems a bit much.
yeah, what was that?
No, it would seem a bit much. It raised my eyebrow if I saw something like that.
Yeah, that would raise
Right.
my eyebrows, but like 12 hours for a book, like that wouldn't raise my eyebrows. Like,
Right.
Right. So we could ask for the number of pages to make sure that, you know,
Well, if they give you the citation, the proper citation for the book, then that's something that's discernible.
right.
Yeah, but you don't want, I mean, I'm speaking maybe out of turn. I don't necessarily know that the office staff has time to look that up, right? So I told him I read Helping the Strong-Willed Child. Do I really want Leslie or someone in the office having to look up how, find the bibliograph? I feel like the licensee bears the responsibility of providing the office the information that they need to look at that thing and move on, right? I mean,
Right.
especially given what, in my opinion, the legislature is asking of the office staff these days, which
Right.
I have opinions about. I don't know that I would feel uncomfortable asking the office staff to say, hey, why don't you look up that book to see what Rick's been reading? And if it's,
Right.
So-
I agree. I mean, you're saying basically you don't want to put another monkey on their back.
I really
Which I-
don't. Yeah,
That's very efficient. But in this day and age, if I knew that you read that book, I would just go to Amazon.com and Google that book.
yeah.
And all the information I needed about how long it was would be there.
Okay,
So-
right,
It-
so then can the licensee must provide full bibliographic information about the book, including page number, right? And I don't know, page number and then I still think there needs to be some kind of summary
Of what they read.
of what they read or what they got from it or how they can apply it to their practice.
Yeah, because you're asking for something that shows comprehension.
Right. And the other thing I'm thinking about it on campus these days, we're having lots of conversations about Chat GPT. Right.
Yeah.
And it is remarkably easy. I don't know if you played around much with that. It is
Oh.
remarkably easy. Yeah.
Super
Just
all the
easy.
time. Did we lose somebody?
Can you say that again? I couldn't hear that.
I think that was me. I said super easy. I was agreeing with you.
Oh, yes.
I don't
Yeah.
know what my computer is doing.
Okay.
I was trying to say super easy. I agree.
Yeah. So I think I would want, to the extent possible, I would want the summary brief. I'm balancing autonomy and control here, and I get that. I would want the summary to be specific enough to my practice that would at least be difficult to get Chat GPT to do it for me. Right. And so if the summary was how you are going to apply it specifically to your practice, right? Or I don't know, someone's gonna have to help me with this, but why you picked that book and how it applies to your practice, that seems like it would be more difficult for Chat GPT to do for me than give me a summary of the book in, 50 words.
Mhm.
yeah.
Does that seem at all
That-
reasonable to
no,
you
that
all and
makes-
to Leslie?
Where's Leslie? Oh, there she is.
Yes, that does. And we can write something up and send it to the committee to look at. So,
Okay. Hopefully the rest of them are a little more straightforward. Our number 4 is something with a post test. And the post test, let's see, which one was that? I saw it.
Oh.
Well, actually, there's not one on the ABA one that provides that.
but there are some that are kind of close.
Yeah,
Usually when they have a post test, you get a CEU certificate that's signed that says how many CEUs it was worth.
would you need the score? Would you need to?
That would be nice, but it's not on most of them, so I don't know that they could provide that.
And Rick, we had I think we just got a beep on the conference call line. If you're on the conference call line, could you go ahead and state your name? Okay, well, if they voice a thought later, I will let you know if someone is adding input from the conference call line.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so just a certificate, the certificate provided for the score with the post test should suffice. Seems reasonable.
And you're looking for a percentage score, I'm assuming, correct, Rick?
Yeah, and I was trying to think, I don't often do courses that have post tests. I usually try to go to conference presentations, but when I have done that, I'm trying to think so I've done some ethics hours with some of the ones that APA provides.
Mhm.
Do have a post test, and I'm trying to remember if they print this score on the certificate or not. Maybe they don't. Maybe you just
No.
pass or
I
fail.
Okay.
don't believe they do.
They
I think
don't.
it's just if you pass.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was
Right,
gonna say
and
you
that,
get it.
but that raises another question. Do you then have to set criteria for what is a passable level? Are we looking at something at 75%, 80%, 90%? What do you have to be? Because I'm also thinking about online places where I can go and the others can go as well, where you can get online education and they will print your certificate any way you want. If you want a percentage score on there, they will do that.
Oh, wow, that's good to know, Ronnie, because I have not I guess in my CEU experience, had or seen the option to say, hey, I want this score printed, or I would like my scores printed on the CEU. That's good to know, to look for it in certain places.
There's a site called CEU for Less, is a good example of that, where you pay for either a certain period or a certain year, and you can go in and take as many courses where you do read the material, then take the test as you like, and it will print that certificate any way you want.
Okay.
So maybe we can put that we want the passing score.
Well, so
If
I like that idea, but it worries me that if what I hear from Tiffany, and this is probably consistent with my memory, if some of the CEU providers don't put the score on their certificate, I'd really hate to rule out someone's use of, for example, an APA course because they just don't print the thing out there. So I'm trying to.
I would say PESI, which is the one that I use typically, does not have a score on the certificate.
yeah,
Right.
I use PESI. I've used PESI in the past, and they don't print.
And that's a well-established.
Yeah.
Right. So it's
So
just a
that may-
certificate of completion.
Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe certificate of completion has to be sufficient for now. All right. 5 is publication or professional presentation. We can use 15 per publication, I believe, for a maximum of 45. And I think that corresponds to number I on the ABA. So that one seems like it's pretty straightforward. Other thoughts on that? Can we move on? Okay, 6, completion of an academic course. And I think that there's language for that. That would be A, I think, or A or B, right? Because completion, transcript, or signed statement by the instructor if it was an audited course rather than a for credit course.
Mhm.
I think you have to have both because I've done both.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry, can we go
Yeah,
back to 5?
sure.
For the licensee shall submit these materials to the board to evaluate and certify. I guess my question would be, should this be done at the time that they complete this, or wait until do you see what I'm saying?
I
Yeah.
do hear what you're saying.
Because
Leslie,
then it's like, if it doesn't meet it, then
Leslie, how have you dealt with I for the, well, or similar? Because master's level people do I think master's level,
We,
yeah, that's D for the master's level folks.
we they don't send us any documentation to keep track of during the 2 years. Is that what you're saying, to have them presented ahead of time when they complete the training?
I think Tiffany was saying, so the second sentence under I for the ABA folks, the licensee shall submit these materials to the board to evaluate and certify the number of hours of credit to be granted. So if I have done this, if I submit, if I tell you that I wrote an article this year and I'm claiming that it took me 15 hours to do that, when it says that I will submit these materials to you,
It would be with the audit. It would not be ahead of time.
okay. Okay,
And if someone did that and they did it in good faith and we decided that it wouldn't count, we would allow them to take additional CEUs to make up the difference before we renewed the license.
okay. It seems like that would be a little bit of a challenging thing to determine, right? So if I told you that I wrote a chapter or a whatever,
Right?
and I claimed that it took 10 hours, I have a hard time imagining you questioning that it took me
Right.
10 hours to write that. So-
Right. I don't think that, generally speaking, I don't think we would question what you told us. I mean, we don't know what kind of research you had to do
Mhm.
to write the article.
I had to figure out how to use Chat GPT.
I guess we're just naive.
Tiffany, does that help at all with your concern that you raised?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So the last few of these get kind of interesting, and there's documentation over here for it. So 7 is providing supervision as defined in our supervision regulation. And there is one means of documentation is, where is it?
F.
F, there it is, signed verification from the university practicum or intern instructor. My only question about that is if I am the university practicum instructor, which I am, so would I write a letter to you from myself?
Yeah, I had the same thought.
Well, generally speaking, when this is done, it's for the on-site supervisors, not the supervisors at the school. So if the on-site internship was the person that is providing the supervision at their internship site.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so in my situation, so my program has a clinic. It's down the hall. All of our students they work in it, right?
Yeah.
And so I am one of the supervisors of record, and I have never. This is one of the things I have not claimed, which I now feel silly for not ever having claimed it, but I haven't. But I provided supervision for, 6
Yeah.
practicum students in that clinic down the hall. I am both the on-site supervisor, right, and I'm the supervisor of record. In that particular instance, there is one person who is both, and it sounds like, Abby, that's the same for you. You
It
are,
is, it
yeah.
is.
So for interns, you are their supervisor.
Yep.
And you are also in charge of the practicum.
Yep. I personally, I've not, knock on wood, had to turn this in. I just keep a list of supervision dates by student.
I think that would be best if you're the person in charge, then I would say to list the dates of supervision to show that it was done.
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me. What do the rest of you think?
Oh. So that makes that you're keeping track of structured supervision time, as opposed to, I'm now thinking through a situation I have in my office where I have a practicum student in for 8 weeks, and I'm providing supervision for him. But it's not necessarily a formalized sit down 1 hour. It's continuously going on.
What's that level? What's that trainee's level of training at this?
It's, and I don't know if it fits into this. This is an undergraduate.
This is probably not actually directly related to your question, but I'm just thinking how that works because I'm an open door supervisor. That
Mhm.
stuff, none of us count it. It's maybe not ideal, but if I have a established supervisory relationship with an intern who's getting licensed, we hit the max that you can cover, which is 15 hours in our standard relationship. So it never goes over into any of the extra stuff.
Right, right.
Because we do like 50 hours or what, it's 50 hours.
Yeah.
So and we can only claim 15 of it anyways.
And I never claimed any of this anyway, so I just thought, oh, that's interesting. I could
Yeah,
be writing this off, but no, because I'm working with him where we're doing some work with assessment where I may have him go off and score something, but then I go back and I review what he has done to make sure that it's appropriate. We're constantly doing this back and forth relationship, so it's nothing that's happening on an like 1 hour a week type thing, which is a lot easier. It's much cleaner, like when I had a postdoc student where there was formalized training supervision, but everything he's doing is being supervised by me. I don't let him do anything.
So do you feel that an undergraduate supervision of an undergraduate student is what they mean here?
I'm wondering if it doesn't fit criteria. That's what I'm, as defined by one of this KR 102-1. I would have to go back and look at that and see if it even fits into that.
Because that practicum, we don't have a requirement, but an internship, they have to be supervised 1 to 10
right
services. So it is more structured.
Yeah, and in a doctoral program, we ask the supervisors to specifically carve out 1 hour for every whatever it is, and so for the doctoral program, we appreciate the open door kind of supervision, but for documentation purposes, we ask give them this hour. So that
on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
It's 1 to 20 or 1 to 30. That's what I remember.
yeah, and we do the same for social work and master's level psychologists too, because everybody has a requirement, so we carve it out as well for every discipline that we supervise for anybody who's going for advanced licensure or doctorate level. So I would assume most places who provide supervision like that are doing something that would give you a record.
Right. And so I think if we make that assumption, then Leslie's suggestion that they provide the dates of the
Yeah.
supervision seems doable.
I agree with that because I'm thinking to like in your example, Rick, where you are the clinic director for the in-house clinic of the PhD program. And there may be kind of an open door kind of supervision policy, or like as Abby's describing for her practicum or her internship program, like there may be an open door clinic, there may be an open door supervision. The ability may be there, but there is still something that says we shall meet for this 1 hour.
Yeah.
Irrespective of
Right. Anything else. Right.
during this week. We have this codified time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that would be appropriate.
And it may be that number 8 works the same way. So that's receiving supervision, except if I'm receiving supervision because of disciplinary action. So. Go ahead.
Inclusive of, so I have a question about that. Is there anything in our statute or in our regulations that speak to consultation?
In your CEU regulation?
Yeah,
I don't believe so.
okay.
Is that,
Do you mean it counting? Because it is, it's number 10.
yeah, number 10, yeah.
Well, case consultation, is that what you were
Yes.
thinking about?
Yes, that's it. That is, and I see it right now. Okay.
Okay, let's get 9 and then we'll come back to 10. Number 9 is initial preparation for specialty board certification. I know that ABEP provides 20 or so hours. It looks like we could have up to 25. I was wondering about a modified J. Or maybe just J straight up. I think when I read J from the ABA requirements, I was assuming that meant when I participate in some other kind of professional activity like what we would see for 11. But I suppose it could also be used if I'm participating in my own specialty board certification. Are there any thoughts there?
If, I'm sorry, but isn't 9, I mean, you're studying, but they don't know how many hours you've done, right?
They don't know. But the assumption for specialty board certification is that you have spent some amount of time prepping.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't actually count the number of hours you spent prepping, but they do provide, it's a standard rate for ABEP. I know that it's something like 20. And having done that, I would say that's fair. So
Does this not also include the EPPP? In my head, it did.
Yeah.
that's not specialty board though.
I know. I don't know why I never read it that way.
Well, and if you're an LP doing CEUs, you already have taken.
Right. Right. So you wouldn't need it if you were just taking the EPPP.
Oh yeah, we don't have a TLP anymore.
Right.
Okay, never mind. Doesn't matter either way.
Yeah. So if you're, this is for if you're going for your ABEP.
Well, we do have TLMLPs though. So I think in my head, not that it matters, but I've certainly in my head, TLMLPs would be taking this EPPP and they do have to have CEUs.
Okay.
No, they don't.
Oh, excuse me, LMLP is going for LCP?
Yes, there, I was gonna say, oh, I wait.
You're gonna find
got
someone
it.
who needs to take that EPPP. Is that
I
your
was,
goal?
I really want them to get credit.
You
That
just
thing
let
is
that go,
big.
Abby? Well,
No, I see now specialty. I actually just sort of skipped right over that when I was in my head. So I'm fine with that. That's just,
So
okay,
so I
just
read
J.
that.
okay.
So I guess I'm confused. How would you show documentation for the prep?
They give it to you. So if
Oh,
you,
okay.
whenever you go for your ABEP, and I really do encourage you all to go for your ABEP at some point. I was on that board for a while. It's a really good process. I'm happy to talk with you about it, and I don't get any kickbacks from them.
Okay.
But when you sit for your certification, your specialty board certification exam, and you pass, they will send you a certificate for, again, for ABEP, I think it's 20 hours.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Continuing
All right.
education.
All right. Thanks.
Uh-huh.
The way, on this set of regulations, I think the last time they were modified was 2003. And in going through some of our statutory cleanup for the bill this year, there was some language that I believe temporary licensed psychologist would essentially have to take continuing education hours. That was not something that we have enforced for many years, but that is something that was removed from the statutory language as part of the cleanup process. So it's possible this may be language that would have referenced that many, many years ago. So.
Okay, so for number 10, we get to case consultation and the other forms of quality care, conferences, treatment conferences, peer reviews, etc. And that looks like it might I don't know exactly if there's a regulation or an item in the ABA that fits that precisely. I was wondering, so at this point, I switched over to the regulation for documentation for the master's level psychologists. And I looked at K, a signed and dated statement from the sponsor, agency, administrator, provider, or other individual acceptable to the board that verifies the licensee's attendance, participation in, or completion of the continuing education activity. That seems very, very broad, that someone could use for a bunch of these different items. And I'm wondering if that could be used or modified for the case consultation or the case reviews that are listed here in 10.
So
Hmm.
I don't even know why I asked about case cons, because this is something that I submit for. And I use the agency with which I do case cons. They provide the hours for which I was a part of the consultation group. So
they give you a certificate?
they give me the number of hours that I attended the meetings. So that I was a consultant of record.
Would something like, I guess that really does fit under K, a signed and dated statement from an agency?
Yeah. The issue here though is the UR. Like, how do you document if somebody's, and these I would assume would be rare, if somebody tried to submit a utilization review, like, hey, I did this big UR for this health agency and I'm claiming these number of hours for it. It's like, oh, well,
Yeah, I think document and trust, that's about all that you can do.
Yeah,
'Cause
that's
I
like,
mean, like, my managers at my agency are required to do 2 hours of UR for me every week. So if they wanted to submit that, I would attest that they did 2 hours a week because it's a requirement of their team management position. So, but as far as I know, nobody claims that. But I don't know how else you would prove that besides
Yeah.
someone saying, yes, they do that.
yeah, I agree. I don't know how else you would do it.
Okay. Number 11 is participation, including holding office in organizations relating to the professional activity, etc. That one looks like J to me.
Can you scroll that up a little?
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Does that look like J to anybody else or something?
For
Yeah, I agree. I don't know where else you would get that from.
Yeah.
huh?
So I'm in agreement with you, Rick, Jay.
And then number 12 is, and this one I've got some thoughts about. Number 12 is receiving personal psychotherapy that is provided by a licensed or certified mental health provider and is part of a designated training program. And so I'm a little puzzled about that one. I understand what it is for a professional to receive personal psychotherapy, but if I'm already licensed,
I think I know where this. I think I know where this is from. So, psychoanalytic
Yep.
programs.
sure.
Back in the day,
Mhm.
required folks to undergo psychoanalysis
During the training program, right?
during training.
And that person would not be licensed already and would not have to do continuing education.
That person would be licensed if they are, say they are already a professional and they are wanting to become an analyst.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Right,
it could still be
right.
required.
Sure. Yes, I'm with you 100%. I get it. I've already got my license. I'm a licensed psychologist. I am not a licensed psychotherapist yet, or not a psychotherapist yet. I am licensed, but I'm got it. Okay. Then the question is, what kind of documentation do you want? Do you want your psychotherapist providing the board your documentation of psychotherapy, I guess?
What about just supplying a bill for services?
Well, also, if we think this is only going to be applicable to already licensed providers who are in psychoanalysis, they just show us that it's a requirement of their program? And then there's no disclosure of services?
I think C is probably close to that on the behavioral analyst. You might want to tweak the wording a little bit, but
Yeah. That could be.
Hmm.
Uh-oh, we may have lost Leslie.
No.
Okay, so we have a couple of options. One of the options is I provide my bill. And that's documenting that I did something, right? That I participated in something. Another option is more like C, saying that it is part of a program, but it doesn't necessarily require more information of me. it requires, I have documented that it's part of my training program, but I haven't documented that I did it.
And it would be one of those situations where we would have to go by trust and saying that, yes, this person, by virtue of being in this program, they are still enrolled in this program. Therefore, they are engaging in the requirements of the program. We would just have to assume that.
Yeah, I think if you get just something from the program, I think they would be the ones that would be keeping track of whether or not that person is, fulfilling the requirements of it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And just logistically, we've already licensed them, so we already have assumed that they are appropriate from a licensing perspective. And that's not a cheap process, so I don't know why they wouldn't meet their criteria. I mean, I guess we can't make that assumption, but I lean towards school.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm fine with that, yes.
Okay, so a modified C for number 12. Okay. My sense is if we have used K at any point in this, that is also kind of I'm sorry, K from the master's level psychologists. I think that K is enough of a catch-all that it would cover practically anything else that a person would throw at Leslie. Does that seem reasonable to you, Leslie? If K is in there, it should cover a whole multitude of sins.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that was a fun process. I have now lots of things to document between now and next May. So it's gonna be fun, Leslie. I'm gonna send you all kinds of fun stuff.
I know. You guys are gonna make your audits a mess just on purpose.
You're gonna audit us on purpose because we've had this conversation. This whole random auditing thing, I'm not gonna believe after next year when all 7 of us get audited at the same time. That's gonna be funny. Watch, I'm gonna get audited next year. This is gonna be the funniest thing ever. This is recorded, right? Because I'm gonna go back and find this recording if I get audited. So. All right. The other thing we were supposed to review and discuss is KAR 102-1-16, which is the use of computerized testing. And I have it right here somewhere. There's a couple of, so as David pointed out, where in the world did it go? It's right here. I found it. David pointed out last time we met, this regulation was built 100 years ago and is referencing the American Psychological Association standards for educational and psychological tests from 1985, which you might appreciate predates computerized testing as we know it now. The current edition of that document, of that book, is 2014. And so I don't actually have a copy of that book. I could probably get my hands on one in one of the programs on campus. I believe that computerized testing is probably addressed specifically in section 2, chapter 3. I was looking at the table of contents yesterday, I think it was yesterday. And I don't have I have not read that chapter specifically in probably since some previous edition. I think what I have what I have in my office is more recent than 85, but probably less recent than 2014. I understand that the current standards address many of the specific issues that are listed under 2 in this regulation. Whether tests are appropriate for clients, the validity and reliability of the test. One of the things I understand the new standards specify is that the provider, the psychologist, the licensee, maintains responsibility for understanding reliability, validity, and applicability, regardless of who's doing the actual scoring and interpretation. So even if it is a computer scored test, it is still my responsibility to, and that's consistent with APA ethics code, right? So if I'm not doing that, then I'm violating the APA code, which means I'm violating professional conduct standards here as well. Beyond that, we need to think about whether there's updates that are needed for this. David tells, and you can talk a little bit, David, if you want to, about this. David tells me that there's some number of cases that come to CRC that have to do with, I don't want to say copying or plagiarizing from a computer generated report, but that's kind of how I'm encoding what you talked to me about the other day, David. You want to say a word or two about that?
Yeah, and I definitely don't have a great deal of experience with this, but it seems like there are some programs now that will not only take the test results from one of the psychological assessments or tests, it will basically provide sort of a computerized analysis based on trends in terms of answering those questions. And so what we've seen, at least sometimes, has been individuals who take those results and then copy and paste and provide a report based on what a computerized process has put out. And so the appropriateness of that, or, as you can see here, I moved to the bottom of the section because the last time this was updated was back in 1987. And so a lot of the technology we have today, it just wasn't in place when this was originally written. So there's 2 kind of factors here. There's one about what are reasonable standards for this conceptually, and then 2, what language needs to be adjusted or updated or added based on the new technology we have since that point.
And to add, some of you know that I'm on CRC, and this essentially is like if a Milan is administered or if a MMPI 2RF is administered, they'll ask for an interpretive report, and one is generated. They may copy and paste the interpretive report straight up and put it in the assessment report given to the client or patient. And I have not been happy when that has occurred.
I would love it if we could word that to avoid that. That is another one of my responsibilities of the agency. I do assess and I supervise everyone who assesses, and I don't allow that. So I think it would be lovely, but we retest people all the time who are coming in with that kind of report. So I think it would be lovely if in the 5 and the 6, somehow we could hit that's available now. Like what you were saying, Rick, 20 years ago, we didn't get an interpretive report because you were doing it all by hand. And now I can enter my Rorschach in a re-op and it gives me an interpretive report. I don't even have to calculate it. So that, I think, is a new thing that if we could address that, it would probably cut down on quite a bit of that.
So specifically saying that the psychologist bears responsibility for generating the material themselves?
I don't know how to say it exactly, because it's basically where to me, it feels like I'm trying to scroll your screen. Where it talks about like C, D, and E. It's all about the integration of the findings being correct, the conclusions and recommendations being appropriate,
Mhm.
that be done by the psychologist, not taken directly from any computer generated material. That be a human process. Like, I don't know how to word that, and even if we're allowed to word it that way, but it's like, I think we assume that C, D, and E would be the psychologist's job, but when you get down to 5 and 6, it's like 6 says you need to make an explicit statement on whether you have seen or examined the client in person. That feels like more of a moot point, because yes, I examined them in person, but then I stuck everything in the computer.
Mm-hmm.
And it popped out a report. So it's less about me being physically present, which used to not be the case because you could sit them down at the computer, but you still had to interpret the results, versus I can get test results from the computer, but I have to do something with it. Does that make sense the way I'm saying that?
It does, and I agree with you. I'm just struggling to find the language to make that work in this situation.
Well, Rick, how do you guys define it with the Chat GP stuff you brought up earlier? This seems a similar sort of process, right?
But no.
Can you say that again, Zach?
Sorry, I meant for your educational system. How do you all regulate it with the Chat GP? Because it seems a similar.
Chat GPT?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know yet, because I haven't, I actually haven't been in that specific situation. I can tell you that when it's kind of a post hoc, we regulate it kind of on a after the fact basis, right? If I get in the quickest way I catch a supervisee is if there's an incorrect name, right?
Yep.
Right. So this is a report about Sally, and all of a sudden Susan's name shows up in the interpretive report. I say, okay, folks, did you cut and paste this from the last time you looked at this and just change the numbers? You know, and so that's not great. That's the easiest way for me to catch that this has happened. All the other ways that I have of catching that this has happened are very qualitative, right?
Yeah.
So I'm reading along,
Alfred.
and Abby, maybe this is kind of what your experience is too. I'm reading along and it's in the student's usual voice, right? And whether that's great or not so great, I'm reading this, and then all of a sudden I get to this paragraph that, hey, that sounds different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you review enough of them, you know the paragraph. I know exactly what it's going to tell you if you have low
Yeah.
self-esteem. Well, how does that look on a re-up? What's that look like in the MMPI or the Mackie? I can tell that you copied it directly from it. What
Yep.
about if on like number 3, where it says not use the results of a computerized test in decision making, if we added verbatim, not use the verbatim results? It's not exactly it, but we could add the same in number 6, where we could put like make an explicit statement on the report that the psychologist has not used verbatim results. So like a negative, double negative.
Or not use the results, not use the verbatim results, or the whole of the interpretive report, or the interpretive report of a computerized test in decision making. Like, we can just explicitly say you can't use the verbatim interpretive report if one could be generated.
How about, I like that, and you could say not use the verbatim report as the sole source of,
That's
something
good.
like that. So like, the psychologist shall not use verbatim computerized testing results as the sole source of blah, blah, blah.
Decision making.
I don't want to add complexity here.
Oh,
I'm struggling just a little bit with the results of a computerized test, right? Because these days, I don't know how not to use the results of a computerized test in decision making.
It's more about report writing than it is.
It's really about report
decision-making.
writing, because every test I give these days, I mean, literally every test I give, I think I have to use some kind of computerization, right? That's the way the scores, if I give a whisk, if I give a WACE,
Uh-huh.
I am entering raw scores into that program and I'm getting scaled scores back out.
Yeah.
And so for number 3, the first clause there, do not use the results of a computerized test in decision-making.
Yeah, that's where it's old, because it says don't
Yeah.
use results in decision-making unless you've signed it. That's all. So maybe we could just change that sentence to like not use it verbatim in your testing report
Or exclusively.
exclusively, any of that sort of language.
One piece of language that I saw the other day when I was thinking about this is something about stressing the importance of transparency in computerized scoring and interpretation systems. I'm going to copy this and put it in the chat.
There's no chat, sorry.
There's
Rick.
no chat, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to read it to you verbatim. This says the standards stress the importance of transparency in computerized scoring and interpretation systems, ensuring that test takers and other relevant stakeholders understand the processes and algorithms used by the psychologist. So now that doesn't specifically say thou shalt not copy a report, but it does say thou shall clarify, right, what I used from this report and what
Yeah.
I didn't,
And why and how.
why and how, right?
I'd be okay with that too. I mean, I'm pretty passionate about testing. Like we use a ton of
Sure.
projective material, and it drives me batty to get reports that are literally nothing but copy and pasted printouts.
Yeah.
It
No,
just
I'm
drives me
right there with
nuts.
you. Right. I'm absolutely 100% with you on that. For years, when I taught assessment, I forced people to hand score everything, you know, and then it got so difficult because now you can't really
You gotta do
buy,
it too.
yeah, you can't really buy the materials needed to hand score everything. The
Uh-uh.
only way to score things now is, and so that was a sad day for me when that transition happened.
Yeah. How much leeway do we have over changing this anyways?
So
It's a
these are all-
regulation, so
Yeah,
we can make a recommendation to the board, right? So we make a recommendation to the board. If the board adopts the recommendation, then there's a process for evaluating the regulation. But this regulation never goes to the legislature. It goes to
Okay.
goes to the Attorney General for review and public comment.
The one thing we will have to buy whatever that you're adopting by reference.
Yeah,
We'll have to buy that book, and the AG's office now requires that we specify the pages that you're adopting.
no,
So
Interesting.
it's gonna take a little bit more work.
Well, I mean, I could give that some thought, and if you wanted to come back, I could think of some ways to word it. We could all do that. Would that be helpful?
I think so. David, I gave you the ordering information of that book yesterday, right?
I'll have to go back and check. I know we talked about a few of the different topics yesterday.
Yeah, if you scroll down to the bottom of that email that I sent you, there's a link that'll take you to the APA website where you can order it.
Okay.
It's not it's APA, so that you probably won't. I guess you might be able to find it on Amazon, but
That's where I'm going right now.
I think you can actually.
Can you do it on
I don't know
Amazon?
how old mine is. I've got one too, but I think it's pretty old.
Rick, can you give me that title again? I'm actually searching on Amazon.
sure, it's the standards for educational and psychological tests. Publisher is APA.
Standards for educational and psychological testing. There's one that says 2014 here.
That's the one.
Yep.
Yes, for a whole $57.90.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought they were pretty cheap. They're not too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Rick, I double checked. I do have that link that you provided. So yeah.
Add it to the cart.
Just for funsies, yesterday, after David and I talked for a minute, I went to Chat GPT. It really is worth getting an account and playing around with. It's an interesting thing. And so what I did is I asked, have you all played with that some a little bit?
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah. So I asked my buddy Chat, can you interpret a Whisk 5? And Chat said, yes, I can. And gave me a paragraph on interpreting a Whisk. And then it gave me a disclaimer and said, however, since I am not a licensed psychologist or not licensed mental health professional, I would recommend that you speak to a licensed mental health. Okay, so yeah, I can, but you really need to talk to a licensed person. And I said, well, thank you. And then I went and back and I put in some index scores. I made them up. They were not even from any report. I just made up index scores out of my head, told it, the VCI was this, the SRI was this, the working memory index, interpret those index scores for me. And it gave me an interpretation, which was interesting.
Yeah.
It's not something, Abby, that I think would have passed muster with any of us.
Yeah.
And if we looked at that, we would have thought, yeah, if you're in an undergrad assessment class, maybe that would have done okay. It would not have been okay for any kind of graduate program. But I thought it was interesting that it made an attempt.
Yeah, I'm surprised. We actually just talked about this today in our group supervision because all of our late teen, early college age, not all, but it keeps coming up where they say they can get their therapy there. They'll ask it like, I'm depressed, what's your advice and stuff like that. And they're like, I don't need to come to therapy anymore. So we've had that come up several times.
Yeah, of course, it will give the disclaimer that I'm not a licensed mental health professional. And so you should, it does give that disclaimer.
It'll do that also for medications as well, right?
Oh, nice.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think it's probably worth we'll obviously have to get the standards, the book for the office. And I do think it may be worth it some additional thought, and come back at the next meeting, which Richard, I guess you'll be taken care of. So this will be your thing to deal with.
Yes.
Okay. So that may be officially tabled. Great. Do we want to look at the unprofessional conduct regulations from other professions, or are we out of time? What is your preference?
So Rick, I know this is your last meeting as chair of the advisory committee, so I'll go ahead and defer to the other members if they're able to stay on, or if normally I would say let's go ahead and pick it up the next meeting, but we're kind of in an unusual situation here. So
We a little bit are. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Do you want to just kind of run through? Actually, David, if you've all got time, I've got a few minutes. David, can you pull up the document that you sent?
sure.
That, pulls together everyone's unprofessional conduct
Yes.
additions.
I'll go ahead and share my screen here. And by the way, concerning the other topics we talked about a little earlier with the continuing education. So there were a couple documents that were forwarded in your packet that gave some examples of the continuing education regulations from Missouri and Nebraska. So if you have any additional thoughts on those two perhaps the next meeting we can talk about those. And so, but here is the combined packet of all the continuing education regulations. It's 42 pages, pretty lengthy, but it's basically all the 7 professions versions of the unprofessional conduct regulations.
So that looked like that was just clean, just language cleanup there. That's not substantive. Right.
Yeah, so for some of these regulations, it identified specific levels of license. And since that point, we have added certain levels of licensure, and now there's going to be additional student licenses and temporary licenses. And so, and a lot of these regulations, there were different pieces that maybe they pulled from other regulations. And so,
Yeah, I very unhelpfully did not take a ton of notes because I was doing 2 things at once when I read through this. One of the things that I can remember noticing across a couple of different ones was additional language related to LGBTQIA+. So like the addition of newer terms in their discrimination section. That's really all I remembered that was something that was an addition rather than a clarification or a correction of incorrect language.
yeah, and I'll comment on that just briefly. That we strive for consistency as much as possible between the different regulations for the professions. But when that topic was being discussed by a lot of the advisory committees, there was a desire to have language that matched what their national association used for the topic of non-discriminatory type policies. And so I don't know if it's unfortunate, but in terms of the consistency, that is one of those items that has a few different versions based on some of those advisory committees wanting to match what the associations were using.
Makes sense.
That makes sense.
I also thought I had really paid no attention to the behavioral analyst stuff because it was so new in our state. They have some really kind of nice statements, maybe because it's so newly written, related to things like not taking on more supervisees than you are capable of, which I don't think anybody addresses as unprofessional. That's a good one, particularly if you work in an agency where you're required to do supervision. They're like, here's another.
Yeah.
And then you have a fallback, a way to say no, when you're working in an agency. I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah, I can't remember anything else standing out.
A couple of the professions have specific items related to confidentiality and social media that I don't think that we speak to as pointedly unless I am missing something in ours. Like, where did I see? Who now I'm forgetting or missing where I saw it.
The LPCs have it, Dave.
Okay. Do you have a page number for that listing?
I don't. It's the last page of the LPC on professional conduct.
I apologize if I'm making some of you dizzy.
LPC meaning master's level, right?
Professional counselors.
Why can I not find them?
1023. If
I
they're
think it's page. Oh, wait, oh, okay.
I did see some of it here.
I have lost the professional counselors.
Well, that's sad.
Okay, so this is some of that language that refers to the social media.
I thought there was another profession. I thought I saw it twice.
Yeah, there's about 3 that have similar language. This would be for the marriage and family therapy profession. And I can explain kind of the differences, but most of them have similar language. So this is marriage and family therapy. The first social media one was practicing inappropriate boundaries with clients with regards to the use of social media. including but not limited to using a personal profile to connect or communicate with clients on any social media platform. At least one of the other professions has that language, but it goes on a little further and it says, or accessing a client's page, basically. The problem, I think a couple of them said we don't want to include that last bit because if we are referred that there is an issue with the client, if it's a public page, is that an issue in terms of, accessing that by looking at it? Or if someone should show us something relating to one of our clients, we don't want to accidentally violate this. And so a couple of them removed that piece, but kept the other part about inappropriate boundaries and using a personal profile to connect or communicate with clients. So there was a distinction between personal profile versus maybe a public page where they would communicate. And then there was 55, disclosing confidential information through social media. And so at least those two items were related to social media.
Richard, I thought we talked about this at some length, or did we not?
I'm trying to remember, and that's why I said if my memory may be failing me on this, and I'm trying to get back to hours when we did an hour revision.
Yeah, we're like midway through. It's unhelpful though, because my page numbers are not consecutive. So it's like on page 1. So
Yeah,
we're like halfway through the way they were.
Yeah, I think this is yours here. Yep. These would be your unprofessional conduct regulations, and there are changes throughout, but I don't think you have the language on social media on yours.
I actually thought that was there.
There is language about record keeping when that was pulled over.
Interesting.
So we moved all of our. I'm not, okay, so we moved all of our record keeping from the other document into this one, right?
That's correct.
That's
And
correct.
there may need to be some official cleanup before the board would make an official recommendation, but I did my best to kind of move that over and then have it be a part of that. So all the unprofessional conduct, record keeping, that regulation has been moved over. It's maybe close to the very end.
Yeah, there it is. I see it's M.
And if does that fall under confidentiality or record keeping? Or I
It's
guess,
kind of its own thing.
yeah, it is, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's-
it's big. It's little m, or little letter M.
Ah, there it is.
Well, and you don't have to wrap up recommendations tonight on unprofessional conduct. The goal still is to have these forwarded to the board by the end of the year, so the board can make recommendations, but there will be at least one more advisory committee meeting in August and then potentially in October. But
I wonder if our thinking about whether I'm looking, I pulled it up on my screen there for a second. I was looking at confidentiality.
Yeah,
The confidentiality language we've got is fairly broad and inclusive, and social media falls under that. It's not specifically identified, right? So, David, if you scroll up a little bit for us to find that language.
it's in G.
Yeah,
That's what I was reading.
right. And so I'm wondering, right, so failing to protect confidentiality or privacy, which may include but is not limited to the following acts. I wonder, and again, I'm trying to reconstruct the conversations. I wonder if our thinking was, well, anything that I would do on social media is included in G. We haven't specifically identified it, but if I disclose personal information of my client, or I'm not saying we shouldn't include it here. I think some of the language we just looked at makes perfect sense, and I don't think I should be looking up my client's personal profiles. But I also wonder if it's already included in G, which is again fairly broad.
You know, my initial thought was that it was included in G, and then when I'm reading through this a little more closely, G 1, 2, and 3 are all related to when and how you disclose. So it's like it's specifically related to disclosure and limits of disclosure and when you can, whereas when it comes to electronically, this never applies.
I think an even broader interpretation to your point, Abby, might be if G read failing to protect privacy, like if you access a client's social media or you attempt to friend a client, that is a failure to protect their privacy. Like that's a breach of privacy of the client. And
Maybe it is included then.
that's a no-no. What'd you say? I'm sorry.
Maybe it is included since we added privacy.
Since we added privacy, like this regulation may be construed as such.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I feel like the necessity of adding that in
Yeah,
some
so
of
look
the others has probably come from it happening.
Right, I'm sure that's true. But look at G2, little g, and then big G. So it includes revealing any information regarding a client or failing to protect information contained in a client's records unless, and then A, B, C, D, right, all modifies that. So if I reveal any information about a client via my Snapchat or Facebook or Instagram or whatever it is that I'm using, I have violated G2.
Yep.
So yeah, if you friend a client on Facebook,
I have violated.
you have violated that.
That makes sense to me.
What letter is dual relationships? Anybody recall off the top of their head? Harmful dual, it's C. Engaging in harmful dual relationships, which will include the following acts: sexual advances, failing to inform, financial interest, undue influence. Okay. That's the other place that social media seems to intersect.
Mhm.
I would agree with that because you can say that engaging them in this relationship on social media is exercising an undue influence over them just by virtue of saying, let's be friends in this domain, or let's engage in this domain of your life. Like they may feel compelled to do so because you have a relationship with them in another domain of their life.
I agree with you, Richard. I'm wondering. I wonder if there's another statement that would be on the same, that would parallel 1, 2, and 3, right? So it's engaging in harmful doing relationships, which includes 1, sexual advances, 2, failing to inform financial interest, 3, exercising undue influence, or 4, if there is something relatively broad that would encompass, something about engaging or seeking relationships with a client outside of the therapeutic relationship. Something I'm trying to think, there must be a negative to that, but I have a client. That client I know is a mechanic. I really can't ask that mechanic to work on my car.
I think that I know that's broad, and I actually would appreciate the addition to that, because you can have harmful dual relationships that aren't sexual in nature, but have nothing to do with financial interests or
Yeah. And that aren't undue influence, right?
Yeah, so arguably
Right.
you could have a very broad statement.
Right. And because number 2 is, I mean, it's very specific about a kind of financial interest, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's, if I have this, if I'm telling you, you need to buy my book that's going to help us in therapy, right? Failing to inform the client that I actually make money on that book, right?
Yeah.
I violated it. I can,
Technically social media would be included. Like you can't make Facebook friends with all of your clients and then send an advertisement.
that's
But
true.
I still feel like the original statement you made is not accounted for.
So I believe what I said was something like 4, seeking or engaging in additional relationships beyond the therapeutic relationship. Is that close to what you heard the first time? I'm really bad about that in class. I'll
Yes,
say
same.
something and one of my students will say, "Can you say that again?" And I'll
Nope.
say, "Nope, I say it one time and I cannot reproduce it. It is impossible."
I can say something similar though.
Yeah, I can get across a general idea, but I can say it brilliantly only once, ever.
Yes, and it may not be the first time. I think yes, that was generally what you said. And I think you could, I don't know if it's from a like just law of parsimony. I don't know if you want to add a 4 or say not just sexual advance. I mean, that I know is our number 1 complaint or number 1 issue. So maybe you want to keep that as number 1 period. And then you add relationships that are not sexual in nature as a separate one. I don't know. Which way is best?
With regard to the privacy issue, I feel pretty comfortable that G down there does a good job and it covers the things. I think that C might benefit from an additional point that speaks to other kinds of relationships that and I keep going back to, I'm sorry, did you say something, Rodney?
No, that was me, sorry.
I guess the downside to adding something like that is if I live out, in Goodland, Kansas, and I'm the only psychologist there, right? And there's only one person in town that paints houses, and I need my house painted, right? It's incumbent on me to make sure it doesn't become a harmful dual role relationship. But I may have to choose to have that person paint my house.
Right. Could we add language in the statement that addresses that in the sense of, you will not, in the broad statement, and add something in there related to inappropriateness or non-evaluated, that you haven't evaluated to be appropriate?
Something to that effect, yes, because I've been thinking all this time about bartering, just like what Rick said, or a situation where there's services have to be rendered in by your client. There would need to be something that is a carve out of what we're talking about. And in a way, it kind of gets addressed in the broader point at the top line of C, engaging in harmful dual relationships, but spelling it out, I think, would be important in point 4 that we're trying to construct.
David, I have a question for you. As an explanatory statement, where would it go in this little section to say, if a dual relationship is not avoidable, it is the psychologist's responsibility. The psychologist bears the responsibility to ensure that the relationship is right, something like that.
Yeah, like ensures no harm is done. I like that.
So I think there was some language, I want to say, for the social work profession. Because I think they were discussing the item that talks about a sexual relationship being prohibited within a certain period of time. And I believe the language I believe it was with their recommendation. They basically said for a certain period of time, it would be prohibited. And then after that, it would be the responsibility of the practitioner to show that there was no harm.
Yeah.
So
That used to be the language in psychology in the ethics code as well.
Yeah, I
Or
remember
it
that.
may still be.
yeah, so their language was basically, it talked about prohibiting sexual advances towards or not limited to sexual harassment or engaging in physical intimacies or sexual activities or undue influence over any person who within the last 24 months has been one client. If such conduct occurs with the former client after 24 months, it is the responsibility of a practitioner to demonstrate that a former client was not being exploited, coerced, manipulated intentionally or unintentionally. So some similar language to that could be added here as an item, and just say if undue relationship occurs, it's the responsibility of the practitioner to demonstrate that the client was not being exploited, coerced, manipulated, or intentionally or unintentionally, or something like that.
Yeah, that feels like an easy addition.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's reasonable. So I think there's potentially 2 items that you may want to consider for C. One of them would be the does not seek additional, because that's a different thing, right? If I'm not seeking a relationship, if I am forced into, like Richard says, bartering or even just using each other's services, right? He's a painter, I'm a psychologist in Goodland. I don't know. I mean, Goodland's a pretty small place. Maybe there's more than one psychologist there, but I'm not seeking that relationship. It may have to happen. And so there's in my mind, there's 2 things. I'm not seeking unnecessary dual relationships with a client beyond the therapeutic relationship. And if I do that, if I have to engage in some other relationship, it's my responsibility to make sure it's not harmful.
I liked when you said if a dual relationship is unavoidable.
Yeah.
So like the first sentence being, I will not seek a dual relationship for my benefit, like outside of the therapeutic relationship. And if a dual relationship is unavoidable, that secondary sentence. I liked the unavoidable part because it stresses that you should try to avoid first.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
We've given you a lot of notes, Leslie. Did you get some of those notes?
Yes.
Okay.
And I've been taking these too, and we'll also have a
taking-
staff member review the video too. So.
Oh, good. That's true. You got all kinds of ways to keep this information safe. Okay. Other thoughts at this point? Okay. All righty.
Oh,
Well, we are, oh, there's upcoming meetings. Do we need to talk about those? Or do you want to talk about those, Richard?
So I think that we're going to continue on the same schedule. I had a brief conversation with David about that. And I think that for a matter of consistency, we're going to stay on Tuesday nights from 6 to 8.
Or whenever, right? 8 or whenever.
Yeah, when have we ever ended at 8?
There was one time,
Yeah, once in the last.
I remember, there was a time, maybe 2. Okay, with that, I think we might be done for the evening.
Yeah, I just have 1 minute. I just wanted to share something. So under item number 7, it was a recognition of outgoing members. So at your last meeting, you did discuss and make recommendations on 5 new members. There were 2 members of the advisory committee who had indicated they weren't seeking reappointment because they needed to spend some time doing some other matters, but just kind of wanted to thank the individuals who have been on the advisory committee who were stepping away. That would be Janine Kesterson and also Zachary Parrott. Appreciate you both serving on the advisory committee and having the helpful discussions and forwarding recommendations to the board. So I wanted to thank those 2 individuals. And then also to thank Rick. He's been a member of the advisory committee as chair, and I personally have definitely enjoyed working with him. And I know that I've benefited through our conversations and all the work that you've done as a board member and also an advisory committee member. So definitely wanted to thank Rick for his service and wish him well. And hopefully he'll come and have conversations with us in the future as well sometimes. So
Sure. Well, it's been a pleasure. It really has. It's been a long time. It's going to be weird, right? With the advisory thing first and then the board thing next. It's been a long time, right? My children were tiny when I started doing this kind of stuff. So, but I appreciate it, and it's been really a lot of fun, and I appreciate the work you all do.
Thank you for all you've done for us.
Yeah. Stay in touch. I'm not going anywhere, so.
Thank you, Rick.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. Is there a second? And Richard.
Second.
Okay. Well, all in favor? Aye.
I.
Hi.
Okay. Thank you all very much. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you, Rick. Y'all take
thank
care.
you.
Okay. Bye-bye.